Raiden Shogun will tear your enemies to oblivion, and today I'm gonna tell you how to build her best. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So what artifacts does the almighty Narukami Ogosho desire? Well, she has two builds, an on-field crit build and a dendro-based build. For her crit build, do not diverge from 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate. Yes, it works with many characters to great effect, but it was specifically designed with Raiden in mind. It has the greatest synergy with her kit, because Raiden naturally wants to build a lot of ER for her battering capabilities, and to of course restore her own burst. 4-piece EOSF helps convert all that ER into something offensive. The 2-piece also helps Raiden meet her dastardly high ER requirements. There is absolutely zero reason to divulge from this set if you're building Crit A. It was created for her specifically, and it exists in the Artifact Strongbox, plus it synergizes greatly with the core of her build. Yes, 4-piece mayonnaise hunters can work if you're playing Raiden in Farini Elan Double Hydro, but it is such a marginal increase over EOSF to the point where the restrictiveness that this set places on her team flexibility is simply not worth it. Plus, you lose the 2-pieces plus 20% DR, making it harder to hit the Shogun's ideal requirements. But for those of you farming hunters, yes, it will work if Arena's in the team. 2-piece mix and match sets for Crit A include 2-piece ER percent, burst percent, and attack percent. As for Dendro Raiden's main sets, well, 4-piece Flowers of Paradise Lost is the best artifact set for any core trigger in any Dendro team. For example, Tome of Virgin would want to use this as well. And in this case, since Raiden's the team's EM trigger, she wants to use it too. The additional EM is of course very nice for Hyperbloom, and the 4-piece directly increases how much damage your Hyperblooms are gonna do. 4-piece Gilded Dreams is really cool too because you get 230 EM total from it altogether, which is all that off-field EM Raiden really wants. 80 EM from the 2-piece, and since Raiden is the only Electro within a Hyperbloom team, that's 150 extra EM, 50 for each non-Electro party member. This makes it an extremely competitive set with Paradise Lost. 2-piece mix and match sets for EM Raiden include 2-piece EM and 2-piece EM. Shocking. As for Raiden's main stats, simple. For DPS Raiden, you have 3 routes to go down. If you have not got Engulfing Lightning, go for either attack percent, electro percent, crit percent, or ER percent, attack percent, crit percent. Choose the main stat combo which allows you to have the most solid offensive stats while still having enough ER on your Raiden. The attack percent, electro percent combo is stronger than ER percent, attack percent, but you should go for the ER percent version if you can't reach your ER requirements on the attack percent, electro percent setup. The Shogun's attack is too low without Engulfing Lightning if you don't have an attack percent piece on her at all, which is why having at least one attack percent piece on her is so important. With that being said, if you have a ton of attack buffs in your team from characters such as Benin and Chevrolet, then an electro percent goblet becomes more viable. Generally, the best rule of thumb is that if you're using an ER weapon, use an attack percent sans, and if you're using an attack percent weapon, then use an ER sans. Yet, if you have Engulfing, then you can also go for ER percent, electro percent, crit percent. EL converts ER into attack percent, so all that ER becomes a lot more offensive rather than only supportive. So you get more than enough ER for Raiden and her team, plenty enough attack percent, and then you can indulge in electro damage bonus. An ER percent sans is especially nice if you have a lot of sources of attack buffing in the team, but if you don't, then an attack percent sans is still very competitive on an EL Raiden. As for Dendro Raiden, simple. Go for EM, EM, EM. You have no reason to variate from this. The thing is, Raiden doesn't on-field at all in Hyperbloom typically speaking, so crit stats and ER have no real value here. She's the main electro core trigger of a team, so her EM matters the most as she will influence the damage of the Hyperblooms the most. As for substats priority on Crit Raiden, simple, go for this. ER percent is always important on pretty much every unit, but it's even more so on Raiden. After all, ER is what makes her world go around, so don't neglect it. Get a healthy balance of crit and attack percent to go along with it too. As for EM Raiden, even simpler. Go for this. You have no need for other stats. EM, EM, and more EM. If you want to min-max your EM Raiden build, then try aim for 1000 EM. Raiden's ER isn't only needed for just her own burst, but also for the entire team's energy economy. It's very important that you meet your team's demands adequately. While hunters can hypothetically be better than Emblem of Severed Fate, it's so much more restrictive. You're locked to playing Raiden with Arena only, which while that is one of her strongest teams, still isn't great considering that one of Raiden's biggest claims to fame is her flexibility. Either way, EOSF is strong boxable and Hunters is in a very flexible domain. You can use Hunters until you get a fully functioning 4-piece emblem set. Flowers may be better, but considering how close Gilded Dreams is, and considering how I feel that most of you already have a competent Gilded set from farming Deepwood back during the Sumeru era, just use that. No need to go spend more resin and resources than necessary, since one of the main points of using Hyperbloom is its cheapness. Both are in the Strongbox though, so if you're a new player with neither, then go ahead and Strongbox for a 4-piece flower set. Yet, what weapons does this intimidating war lady need in order to quickly dispatch of her enemies? We'll start with Crit Raiden's weapons first, then move on to EM Raiden weapons. First off, Engulfing Lightning. That massive ER stick is the stuff of dreams, and the passive provides Raiden everything she could ever want. All that attack percent allows you to build ER percent with an Electro Goblet, as we already covered earlier, and the increased energy recharge after using her burst is neat because she gains energy during her burst, and a lot of it. Crit Raiden's best in-slot pick for sure. Free-to-plays should turn to the catch. It's free, and yes, while fishing absolutely sucks, patience is key as you end up with a weapon that makes the toil completely worth it. Plenty of ER percent for Raiden to use freely, and all that burst damage percent at R5 is incredible. The refinements are free too. There is no reason to consider any other free-to-player budget option when the catch exists, just use this on her. If your catch is being used on someone else, such as Xiangling, then Favonius Lance can work too. It's also going to be on Engulfing's weapon banner. But you lose the big burst damage percent that the catch provides. It's more effective to run catch on Raiden and Favonius Lance of Xiangling if you find yourself in this predicament. Raiden loses a lot more by not having catch compared to Xiangling, who can do without. R5 Missive Wind Spear is actually a better budget option than Fav if you have it. Mostly thanks to all that juicy attack percent. Though it's an event weapon from the 3.x time, so if you're a newer player, sadly you aren't gonna have this. A highly refined deathmatch is also surprisingly really good on Crit Raiden, especially if you're only fighting one enemy. Plenty of crit and attack percent, but I do want to add that an R1 deathmatch will be worse than a free R5 catch, whereas an R5 deathmatch will be better than an R5 catch. As for other 5-star weapons, Primordial Jade Winged Spear will be Raiden's second best option on the whole. Lots of attack percent, nice crit, and 5-star tier base stats. It is a standard weapon, so not everybody is going to be lucky enough to land upon this, but it is indeed pretty good. The gap between page AWS and EL is big enough to where I'd say that upgrading is still worthwhile, but I'd prioritize C2 to 3 first if you're starting with C0 and already have a Jade Spear for her. Calamity Queller is also very good on Raiden, don't underestimate it. You won't get the full effect of the passive on Crit Raiden as you get 2 times the attack when the equipper is off field, though a DPS Raiden will be, well, on fielding her DPS. Either way, you still get a super sizable chunk of attack and some lovely elemental damage bonus percent. I'd argue that with Queller, you can use the ER percent Electro percent build. Queller covers for all your attack-based needs. Homa is an all-rounder polearm. Great if you have it, a good crit stick, and even if Raiden doesn't build HP, you still get a little bit of extra flat attack from the HP to attack conversion. After all, she'll still have like 20k HP roughly speaking. It's a good choice for her, but there's nothing particularly remarkable about it on Raiden. Prospector's Drill is very nice, since Raiden's teams will pretty much always have some form of healing in them. It's an easy passive to trigger and maintain. I will say that much like Deathmatch, his pick only really shines on Raiden at R5, and it will be worse than the catch if you don't have many refinements. Lumidu's Elegy and Vortex Vanquisher both have a case of stat stick-itis, where they are mostly only good on Raiden because of how quality their stat sticks are. That's all I have to say about them. Lumidu's does look pretty majestic on Raiden though. When it comes to Dendro Raiden, you only have 2 true options. Dragon's Bane is used solely for its EM, all the other stats don't matter, and it's not like that passive is going to do anything for Hyperbloom teams in the first place. Refinements also don't matter for this specific use case. However, a fun factoid for you is that an R5 Ballad of the Fjords is actually stronger for Hyperbloom Raiden than Dragon's Bane is. It's simple math. You get 240 EM from an R5 Fjords and 221 EM from a level 90 Dragon's Bane. Though, please don't go buy 5 freaking BPs for EM Raiden. This is more so a use it if you already have it kind of thing. If I didn't mention your personal Raiden choice, then take a look here. Every polearm that Raiden could realistically use is here, and I felt like anything below the free option of catch simply wasn't worth mentioning, because anybody can go and get a catch for themselves. Either way, Engulfing hasn't quite been power crept just yet. Yet who will be forming the Shogun's army? Here's the thing, Raiden is quite flexible, so she has a few main archetypes. Double Hydro, Hyperbloom, Hypercarry, Aggravate, Physical, and Rational. I'm gonna discuss them one at a time, and then provide a few example team options for the archetype. First, Double Hydro. This is Raiden driving 2 burst-based Hydro characters with an animal on the end for VV Shred buffing. Since this is an Electro Charge team, Double Swirl easily occurs, and all major sources of damage in the team get buffed. All 3 of the Hydro characters that you could potentially use here being Farina, Yolanda, Xingqiu are all burst-based. Raiden's skill increases the amount of burst damage that teammates deal, which is huge for Yolanda and Xingqiu, plus she reduces the team-wide ER requirements of the whole comp. This allows you to invest more into offensive stats and weapons on your Hydros. For example, being able to use Aqua Simulacro on Yelan with less trouble. Farina is especially good here because she is a team-wide buffer. She buffs not only Raiden's source of damage, but her own and Yelan's as well. She also enables Raiden to use the Hunter set, but I've already discussed my problems of doing so. Example comps for this team include Raiden, Yelan, Farina, Jean, Raiden, Yelan, Farina, Xian Yun, Raiden, Yelan, Xingqiu, Kazuha. You get the gist. Then Dendro, or more specifically, Hyperbloom Raiden. Whether you're using her with Alhaitham or on-field Nahida, Raiden's role remains the same. She acts as the Electro Hyperbloom trigger of the team. This means that her EM matters a lot, as she will greatly influence the damage that the Dendro cores deal. Her uptime is very long, she still provides a burst percent with her skill, which is huge for characters like Yelan, and she has a very wide range of Electro application, making her great in AoE. Excellent Electro pick for this comp. Example teams include Alhaitham, Yelan, Raiden, Nahida. Alhaitham, Farina, Raiden, Baiju. Nahida, Yelan, Xingqiu, Raiden. Hypercarry Raiden is a team that focuses on Raiden being the main on-field DPS of a team. Every character serves to boost her window of massive front-loaded DPS. It's essentially a quote-unquote sustainable nuke team. The rotation for these teams feel really fast as Raiden does her damage very swiftly here. She also has pretty good ease of use as a hypercarry. Example teams include Raiden, Kujosara, Bennett, Chevreuse. Raiden, Kujosara, Bennett, Kazuha. If you don't have a C6 Kujosara, then you'd want to use an R5 TDDS Lisa. For example, Raiden R5 TDDS Lisa, Xiangling, Chevreuse. Raiden R5 TDDS Lisa, Bennett, Kazuha. Bennett does work in these teams, but Xiangling's pyro application is far better for these kinds of overload comps. I'll mention Raiden Aggravate because it is an option. The main reason as to why I don't recommend it is because it's worse for Raiden's personal damage compared to her hyper teams, but you can still play them if you're interested. To put it simply, Raiden takes advantage of how Aggravate makes her electro damage stronger. Keep in mind that before you get Nahida C2, a Baiju on TDDS will be a stronger Dendro support for this team. Example teams include Raiden, Kujosara, TDDS Baiju, Kazuha. Raiden, TDDS Lisa, C2 Nahida, Kazuha. Raiden, Fischl, TDDS Baiju, Kazuha. Raiden, Fischl, C2 Nahida, Kazuha. You get the idea, I hope. Physical is the Raiden team that I recommend the least. It will be Eula and Fremine's best team, but far from Raiden's personal best team. Her long skill uptime is very good for consistent superconduct procs, and when Eula's burst needs regenerating, Raiden can use her burst and help with Eula's ER needs. The Shogun also helps introduce a form of front-loaded damage into this very backload-heavy team, which helps even out the playing field. Example teams include Eula, Farina, Raiden, Mika. Eula, Yelan, Raiden, C6 Rosaria. Eula, R5 TDDS Lisa, Raiden, C6 Rosaria. Then for Rational, I don't think this team is as strong as Raiden's more modern teams in all honesty. I mostly mention it because it's still an option at the end of the day, and I most certainly would receive comments if I chose to leave it out. This is a variant of the National team, and one of the easiest to play variants. Raiden's burst percent, which comes from her skill, is very nice because Xiangling, Xingqiu, and Yelan all deal burst-based damage. The ER requirements for all of these units tend to be quite high, and Raiden masterfully reduces them all down to create a team where characters are constantly bursting. It's got a very nonsensical, do whatever you want playstyle to it, and while I do think that Raiden has better teams nowadays, it's still viable if you want to give it a go. Example teams include Raiden, Yelan, Bennett, Xiangling. Raiden, Xingqiu, Bennett, Xiangling. Raiden's an Omega flexible unit. Chances are you've got some characters that can work with her. Yet how does the almighty Shogun work? Well, her normals deal 5 basic physical strikes while looking cool. Okay. As for Raiden's skill, when she casts it, she creates this Electro Eye above herself. The eye does a few things. First off, it deals coordinated Electro normal attacks when either Raiden herself or another party member does normal attacks. And secondly, based on how much burst cost your teammates have, they will have their burst damage increased while the ring is up. The more of a cost, the better your character's burst damage will be. Then for the main meat of her kit, Raiden's burst. She unleashes a big electro slash from her boobies and has all of her normal attacks converted into electro damage. This all counts as burst damage, but it can still trigger procs such as Yelan and Xingqiu's burst. Do note that what Raiden's burst can proc is selective, because there is a difference between characters who can proc on input and proc on damage dealt. For example, Xingqiu and Yelan proc on a normal attack input. Beidou procs when normal attack damage is dealt. Raiden's burst counts as burst damage, but the input of executing that damage is by using your normal attack button. This is why Raiden can't proc every form of off-field sub-DPS. The type of it matters. Her burst also has stacks which make it stronger, and these stacks are visible in the form of a ring that loops around the Electro Eye above her. The ring acts as a counter. Raiden builds up Resolve every time a character uses their burst, and this is clearly indicated when more of the ring lights up. Once the ring is fully lit, her burst will be fully powered up. This means that you always want to use everybody else's burst in the team before using Raiden's burst. Her burst will also be powered up based on how much of a ring you filled out beforehand. As for Ascension passives, simple. Raiden's A1 lets her ring gain more lights when her teammates collect energy, pretty much just a way to make stack generation easier with Raiden. Her A4 has all the ER she builds, give her more electro damage bonus, and makes her ER restoring effects even greater. This A4 seriously incentivizes building plenty of ER for your Raiden. As for talent priorities, simple. For a crit Raiden, go for this. Raiden's burst damage has nothing to do with her normals, as the burst itself has its own scalings. Ignore her normals completely. It's worth crowning Raiden's burst to make the most of her ER restoring utilities as well. Level up her skill to 9, but then don't go beyond that. Crowning her skill will no longer give you any more energy, it caps at level 9 with 0.30% energy. As for EM Raiden, go for this. Level your skill to 9 so you can still enjoy the burst damage bonus that it provides, but you can completely ignore her other talents. Raiden's Constellations are feigned throughout the land, so why not discuss exactly what they do? This helps Raiden's ring light up faster, so teams where you might not have been able to fully light up the ring can completely light it up now. Neat. Death Ignore is the strongest form of damage increase in the entire game, which is why it's such an absolute breakthrough to Raiden's own numbers. Alas, I'd only get this now if you're a super dedicated Shogun simp. This is because investing C2 into any modern DPS, whether that be Linny, Arlecchino, Nervalette, or even Muolani, you will yield out a ton more value. Great C2 for Raiden specifically, but in the grand scheme of things, it's nowhere near as valuable as it used to be. A C0 R1 Nervalette does more damage than a C2 R1 Raiden. Let that sink in for a minute. There is actually a very significant difference between a C2 and 3 Shogun. C3 is actually still decently competitive, but once again, only if you already have it. Don't get it now if you're still only at C0. Invest all that into Arlecchino and such instead. This C4 is certainly something. It'd be a lot better if Raiden herself got the attack percent buff. I have no clue as to why they prevented her from accessing it when her last 3 Constellations have all been about her own damage. The burst damage percent gain from her skill capped way back at level 9, so this extra plus 3 isn't going to change anything either. Her C6 makes everybody's burst, except her own, have their cooldown get reduced. But why not for Raiden herself? I think that C6 Raiden could have aged a lot better if they let her reap the benefits of the burst cooldown reduction as well. No clue why they were so worried about making a C6 character too broken. Like, come on man, it's a C6. Raiden's vertical investment. Man, unless you're a simp that really wants to play Hyper, invest all these Primo Gems into any modern DPS instead. But if you insist on hyper-investing into Raiden, go for C3, then R1. Yes, the weapon banner is a lot better now, though her C2 to 3 are far too good for her own DPS to pass up. Ignore her last 3 Constellations unless you have a very specific use case for them. Raiden might be far from the meta behemoth that she used to be, but at least she's still super cool. You can absolutely make her work if you want to, and she can work at the head of some pretty solid team cores. If you're a more experienced player on the fence about wanting Shogun, as you may need an Electro DPS, wait for Chlorand. If you're a newer player that hasn't got much of a roster yet, Raiden's not a bad choice. I'd still say wait for Chloriander in such a predicament, but Raiden will absolutely find a comfortable place on a new player's account. Hopefully this video was able to get your Raiden to illusion shatter her enemies' lives. This has been Juice, signing out, and here's my Raiden tier list in terms of coolness. Agree or disagree?